One famous definition of faith from the Christian tradition is from Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Etymologically, the root of the word faith relates to the word trust. So faith trusts that something is or will be the case, even though there is not verifiable proof. In many cases, the evidence on which faith rests is internal. It is subjective. It comes unpredictably, as opposed to external, objective, and easily repeatable evidence in laboratory conditions. Which doesn't make those faith claims necessarily less true, but it does make them difficult, if not impossible, to either prove or disprove with the scientific method. The rub, however, from our perspective here in the early 21st century, is that we are almost 500 years into the scientific revolution. In 1543, Nicholas Copernicus's book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres shattered the Ptolemaic view of the universe as this three-tiered structure where heaven is literally up, hell is literally down, and that earth is right there in the middle, with we humans conveniently right at the center of that drama of life, the universe, and everything. Not narcissistic at all. But the Copernican revolution showed that it is the sun and not the earth that is at the center of our solar system, which decentered our place, or lack thereof, in the grand scheme of things. Decentering that has become increasingly clear with the paradigm-shifting discoveries of Darwin, Freud, Einstein, Hubble, and so many others. Some of you may recall when the self-proclaimed evolutionary evangelist Michael Dowd preached here back in 2014 on a sermon called Factual Faith, Religion as if Survival Mattered. Dowd likes to contrast a flat earth faith with an evolutionary faith. And for Dowd, the problem with a flat earth faith is that it is BC, not before Christ, but before Copernicus. At the same time, that doesn't mean that we have to throw out all of that BC, before Copernicus material. As I say each Sunday, here we seek to draw wisdom from all the world's religions, balanced with the insights of modern science. And there remain many compelling reasons to take ancient theologies seriously, metaphorically, archetypally, but we go dangerously awry when we take those flat earth metaphors literally. Indeed, the 20th century theologian Dorothy Solier has pointed out that faith without doubt is not stronger, it is simply more ideological. Faith without doubt is not stronger, it is simply more ideological. And there are daily examples in the news of ideological leaders who are led not by evidence, but by ideas. They are pre-convinced of these ideas, and they just keep repeating these ideas over and over. That's ideology. They won't change their mind despite increasing stacks of evidence to the contrary. Along these lines, Anne Lamott has written that the opposite of faith is not doubt, it is certainty, and that is madness. And you can tell you have created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people that you do, conveniently. Stephen Colbert calls this phenomenon truthiness. False talking, it feels true, right? False talking points repeated over and over until people are manipulated into believing the misinformation. And this tactic is not new. Ancient Athenian democracy gives us the word demagoguery for politicians who appeal to emotions, to fears, to prejudices, to ignorances, to gain power and to promote political motives. To relate ideology and demagoguery and truthiness back to our commitment to evolutionary religion that embraces all that we have learned since the scientific revolution, it's been said that the liberal turn in religion, and keep in mind that word liberal comes from the root liber, meaning free, so that a free religion, a liberal religion, is an attempt to create meaningful lives and to build beloved communities in a world that is diverse and in which the traditional center has fallen out. It is a shift from authority that is grounded in community. I believe this because everyone else believes it. Or authority grounded in hierarchy. I believe it because someone superior to me allegedly believes it or told me to believe it. Or authority grounded in tradition. It's always been this way, right? The 7 last words of the church. We've always done it this way. 2, authority grounded in reason. What is logical? Authority grounded in experience. Because, not only is this tradition experience, but I've actually experienced this works pragmatically firsthand for myself and can be proven for the scientific method. Accordingly, what I mean in my sermon title by the spirituality of doubt is a skepticism towards secondhand claims that you should do or believe something simply because it is traditional or because an authority figure says so, and a growing demand to test the validity of claims about what is meaningful and what is sacred in the crucible of one's own firsthand experience. The bumper sticker version of this, some of you may have seen, is that, religion is for those who are scared of going to hell, and spirituality is for those who have been through hell right here and now on this earth. And I do think there are real ways in which Unitarian Universalism is an attempt to be spiritual and religious, and to say, you don't have to do this alone. We can figure this out together. So looking to the growing edge of doubt today, there is an emerging field, seriously, called ignorance studies. More formally, it's called agnotology. So think about the word agnostic, right? So the Greek word for knowledge is gnosis, G-N-O-S-I-S. So the reason we have knowledge is because the Greeks had gnosis. And so you add that A in front of it, right? Which means we don't know. So agnostic, right? So gnosis is to know. Agnostic is that you're not sure. So agnotology is the study of what we don't know and why we don't know it in general, but it's also specifically, and this is really the most interesting part that differentiates it from like that whole field of philosophy of epistemology, what we can know, that agnotology specifically studies what keeps ignorance alive and how is ignorance often used as a political instrument. So as the X-Files tells us, the truth is, right? Okay. The truth is out there, but there are also things that people don't want you to know, right? And perhaps the most dangerous example today is climate change denial. However, another example from recent history that's of great interest to agnotologists, because they want to see the parallels to today, is the way that the tobacco industry exploited doubt. We're just not sure that cigarettes cause cancer, right? How long did that perpetuate at great political and economic interest and at the cost of far too many lives? So as explored in a recent article in the New York Times called "The Case for Teaching Ignorance," there can be a lot of virtue in confessing how much we don't know. Some of you may know the joke about getting a PhD, that to get a doctorate degree means that you know more and more about less and less till you know everything about nothing, right? So by confessing how much you don't know, even if you have a doctorate in this little tiny sliver of knowledge, that uncertainty can foster latent curiosity. When you tell people what we don't know, they might be inspired to go find out something about it, while emphasizing clarity can convey a warped understanding of what we do actually know, which is usually quite limited. To take an example from the medical field, so take like a standard neurology textbook that's 1,414 pages long. That could easily mislead a student into thinking that we know a lot more about the brain than we actually do. Even if we know hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages about the brain, that's a tiny amount about what we could ever really know about the brain, not to mention the whole problem of using the brain to study the brain, right? That'll give you a headache if you start thinking about that. Moreover, to summarize a point made in Thomas Kuhn's landmark, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, the more we know, the more we can ask. Some of you may discover this about, like the more you read, the more you discover all these books that you thought you had a really long list to read until you start getting into that book, and then you realize there's all these more books. And that questions don't give way to answers as much as the two proliferate together. The poet Rilke called this living the questions. In contrast, the history of Western civilization has in many ways been biased toward faith and belief over skepticism and doubt. As a counterbalance, the historian Jennifer Michael Hecht, she's the one that put together that scale of doubt quiz that's on the cover of her order of service. She's written an excellent volume called Doubt, A History, in which she traces the history of great doubters through the ages and across the globe. And in a world where faith and belief are often the norm, I feel like at this point I may need to say the standard caveat of, not that there's anything wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong necessarily with faith and belief. Unitarian Universalism is a big tent. There's room for both faith and belief as well as skepticism and doubt. But in a world that has been heavily biased here in the West toward faith and doubt, it can be disconcerting for some to read through that quiz on the cover of our order of service and to see something framed in terms not of doubt and faith as the norm from which skepticism and doubt are the heresy or the deriving, to instead to see skepticism and doubt as the norm and that as the framework. And really challenged to step back and reflect on what we believe, what we disbelieve, and why. And regarding her motivation for writing a world history of doubt, Hecht writes that the only thing that she saw that doubters really need, that believers already have, is a sense that people like themselves have always been around, that they are part of a grand history. And in her research, she discovered that throughout history, there have been saints of doubt, martyrs of atheism, and sages of happy disbelief, which date to as early as the skepticism of the pre-Socratic philosophers, as well as up to the Athenian gadfly himself, Socrates, who taught that wisdom was often not how much you know or think you know, but that wisdom was being aware of how much you don't know. There's also strong doubt and skepticism in the Jewish and Christian traditions, two early examples of which are the books of Job and Ecclesiastes. But perhaps the most helpful part of Hecht's global survey of doubt is a reminder that in contrast to the history of Western civilization, in the East, when we look at doubt in the East, the existence of God was rarely a central question. And there are prominent Eastern traditions in which doubt is revered. Most prominently, the Zen Buddhist tradition teaches great doubt, great awakening. Little doubt, little awakening. No doubt, no awakening. Now that Zen saying is quite a contrast from where we started this morning, with faith as the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, Jennifer Michael Hecht traces what she calls the great schism between those believers and doubters who find themselves on opposite ends of her scale of doubt quiz. She writes that great doubters, like great believers, have been people occupied with the problem of trying to figure out whether the universe actually has a hidden version of humanness. Trying to figure out whether the universe actually has a hidden version of humanness, or whether humanness is the error, and people would be better off weaning ourselves from our sense of narrative and justice and love, thereby solving the schism and becoming more like the universe in which we are stuck. Now, I'm not going to attempt to resolve that schism this morning, but wherever you find yourself on that spectrum between faith and doubt, I would like to leave you with two quotes. The first is from the philosopher Peter Rollins, a self-proclaimed practitioner of pyrotheology, which he calls an incendiary faith that courageously embraces brokenness, resolutely faces up to unknowing, and joyfully accepts the difficulties of our existence. Regarding what Hecht calls the Great Schism, Rollin writes that the individual who is able to loose themselves from the notion that there is an ultimate purpose to their lives. So if you can loose yourself, for Rollins, from this notion that there is an ultimate purpose, capital U, capital P, to your life, you might be able to free yourself from the negative melancholy that comes from being unable to find that purpose, or the naive optimism that comes from thinking that you will. For Rollins, the secret is that there is no secret. Instead, the challenge is to discover and deepen love. For love not only affirms the world, it produces a surplus in that joyful affirmation, acts that enact liberation. Likewise, regarding how a spirituality of doubt can ironically produce a world-affirming love for this world, for what we can do here and now, and liberating acts for what we know we can do for people and places once we are free from false restrictions. So keeping that in mind, I invite you to hear a final poem that I first read from this pulpit a few months ago. It's by the 20th century Hebrew poet Yehuda Amichai, and it's called From the Place Where We Are Right. It's about how doubt, including self-doubt, can open us to new possibilities. From the place where we are right. So keep in mind Nancy's first part of this sermon on being right and being wrong as you hear this. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. It'll just be winter. Flowers will never grow in the spring. From the place where we are right is hard, and it is trampled like a yard. But doubts and love, they dig up the world, and a whisper will be heard where the ruined house once stood. As you continue to discern where you find yourself in your own firsthand experience on this scale of doubt, on this spectrum of faith, I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing together hymn 345. With joy we claim the growing light. Nick will play it through one time.